thought we would end up where we are today. But please join me in welcoming Mayor Pete Buttigieg.
Thanks. First of all, thanks for honoring me by joining us this evening. Oh, and just wave in the back if you're having trouble hearing. I gather you need to really project into these mics for them to work. It's a real pleasure to be here. I want to thank the plumbers and steam fitters, too, at a time when organized labor has shown itself to be the backbone of the middle class, but labor is also under attack right now. And in particular, when I hear a lot of hand-wringing of folks saying, you know, if only in this country we had some way besides college for there to be good skill training to help people get in the middle class. Then you come to a facility like this, you see all the gear in the back and all of the training and education that's going on right through the building, through the apprenticeship programs. It's just a real reminder of how much we ought to be thankful. So I just want to note that as we're here. For having this idea. Thank all of you for being part of it, and say that you know, there's even some stories in the book about my first time in this state for political reasons back in the beginning of the 2008 race, and it's just a real pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Our first question comes from Kendra Dotson Bright-Specker from Webster County, Iowa. What is your favorite book?
All right. So I got to go with Ulysses, not beach reading, but Ulysses by James Joyce. I think is a really important book because it puts everyday life at the center, and it's doing the same thing in literature that I'm trying to do in politics. We get caught up in this show, right? Everybody's talking about the show in Washington, especially the kind of reality show / horror show environment. And it takes our eye off of all the ways in which politics matters because of what it does in our everyday lives and the way that our lives go better or worse because a policy decision was made. And I think about that as somebody who raped us financially. I think about it as somebody who was sent to work on the U.S. president. All of these things is that it's kind of hard to figure out what's going through it. I'm not sure anybody's ever actually just sat down and read it from beginning to end the way you would, hopefully, my book. And, but the entire book takes place across one day. It's one day in June. And it's mostly about this one guy, this middle-class guy going about his life in Dublin. And all of it in the same way. Like, think of this, if somebody wrote down all the thought of what this novel was about. But I think it's time for us to pay more attention to the everyday, the way that book does. I even think American greatness has more to do with the everyday than anything else. So I think about how we came out on top of the Cold War, for example. And there was spectacular capabilities on display of what America could do on something like the space program, right? We sent somebody to the moon. But the Soviets had a pretty impressive space program too. Well, one of the things we had going for us is that there were way more everyday Soviet citizens who wished they were US citizens than the other way around. And the reason I think this is so important for us to remember today is that in the post-Cold War period, we've been in infrastructure. We have been disinvesting in health, and it's making our everyday lives harder. It's making it harder to afford to live in this country. And no matter how spectacularly powerful our military is, no matter how impressive our space program is, it isn't going to come to much if we can't deliver a good everyday life for Americans. And so I guess my literary tastes are kind of like my political.
Suzanne Somerville in Johnston County, Iowa. And actually, before I read this, Jonah, are you here? Are you ready? Can you grab the mic? And then we'll take, after this one, we'll take questions from the audience. In chapter 16 of your book, you share your process of publicly announcing that you're gay and pondering being openly gay in Mike Pence's Indiana at the time. In light of President Trump's appointees to the Supreme Court and several recent efforts to roll back protections of rights for LGBTQ persons, what alliances have you built or actions have you taken to ensure protections for this population will not be eroded?
Well, obviously this one's pretty personal. And even though they're paying lip service to the idea of, like the president was asked about my marriage, so that he could have the opportunity to say he was fine with it. That's nice. Meanwhile, we find out this week that they changed the State Department guidance. I don't know if you saw this. So that if you are, for example, in an international adoption scenario, and you're a same-sex couple, as far as the United States government is concerned, you have a child born out of wedlock. You know what that means. It means you are not a citizen of the same country as your own child at the time that they were born. And that's discrimination. That's one more example of how discrimination then makes your everyday life harder, right? If you have to go through a tremendous amount of bureaucratic difficulty just to establish that you belong to the same country as your own child. So there's talk and then there's policy. And every policy turn we've seen out of this administration has been hostile to LGBTQ people. Needless to say, the war on trans Americans, the attack on the ability of transgender Americans to serve in the military, Americans believe, which is that it should be legal to discriminate against somebody because of who they are. A basic American value that was upheld in the House. How far is that going to go in the Senate? Will they even bring it up for a vote? No. I doubt it, because they don't want to go on the record being against it, and they also don't want to let it happen. And of course, this president could lead on that issue, but not getting my hopes up. So, as president, my goal is to make sure that every American enjoys truth, that I really know what it's like to be a trans woman of color, other than that it must be hard in so many different ways. What I know is we all got to stand up for each other, just like people of different parts of the economy and different geographies all got to stick up for each other. And this is just one example of that. But I'm glad that the questioner mentioned the word alliances, because I also see an opportunity for people who are very different from each other to form common cause. You know, the administration right now specializes in taking people who have shared interests and dividing them against each other. Largely, it's been done through race, right? And it's even pushed the Democratic Party into, I think, sometimes accepting the premise of some of these questions. It's like when we have a debate over, should we be for the working class or should we focus on racial justice, which is a false choice. First of all, a lot of people in the working class are also racial minority. But secondly, if you believe in fairness, then the exact same thing that motivates you to believe in racial justice is what motivates you to stand up to, for example, corporate domination of our lives or stand with organized labor. All of these things ought to go hand in hand. And so we can either allow ourselves to be wedged off against each other, or we can insist that anybody who's ever been marginal can't just stick up for our little group, people who have my life experience. We all got to be sticking up for each other. If we do that, I think it's going to be a powerful and very beautiful within our churches by the policy we're seeing right now.
Hi, my name is Tanya Keith and I own Hatcher Renovation, and I know that you're a fellow old house lover. And the work that I do is restoring 100-plus-year-old houses in the urban core of Des Moines. What I would like to know from you is, what is your housing policy with how do we get people to, so when I moved onto my block, more than half the houses were on the block were abandoned. And there are people like me that are taking on those projects and trying to do right by both the neighborhood and the architecture. And the problem that comes with that is we have these houses that were left by white flight that are now very diverse neighborhoods, but they have these enormous problems with urban decay and houses that are falling in on themselves. How do we maintain our historic architecture and so create diverse communities and not just like a shell game with moving disadvantaged communities around? Culturally diverse neighborhoods, like what do you think about that from a policy perspective?
I'm going to stand if that's all right, because that'll be easier for me to see. This hits close to me because we got a house built in 1905. So it's our little money pit. It's some new breaks every day, but we also love it. It's a very special place, and it was. So I'm glad we share that. We probably share some of the aggravation too. I was trying to strip a window once and realized the only way to get it done. Wanted having to go to a city council. I should have done. Well, kind of think that we didn't ask for it back, so I guess I. Now it feels like this global issue, right? Historic. Nothing gets more local. Like some often pay out of the scene from Parks and Rec, the Historic Preservation Commission meeting, right? And a lot of this is very kind of on the ground neighborhood, but actually, a lot of these things are touched by federal policy in a lot of ways. Some of the green development block grant, which at first they were threatening to cut outright in the federal budget, then they backed off because all the cities were yelling at them. Those are examples of how we can support the affordability for low, moderate income families to be able to do something that's also a gift to the neighborhood, a gift to the community. As you read about, we had to remove a lot of houses in our city, but our goal was to save as many as we possibly could. And to do that, you got to help families who want to do it. And it shouldn't just be a kind of luxury item that's kind of a hobby for people with the most means. It should be something where you in some way buy down the difference for a family, including a family of modest means, that's ready to fix up a house, maybe with their own hands, and empower them to do it. And I think we got to have a Department of Housing and Urban Development that will support people in doing it. We might even go so far as to extend the same kind of policies and tax credits that we apply to businesses that can get historic tax credit, right?
Yeah.
And think about doing that for individuals.
I would love to see the federal historic tax credit program expanded to residential property.
Imagine what that would do for our neighborhoods. And it would help with their diversity.
And the state historic tax program in Iowa is the only thing that makes restorations of those houses possible. And we could reach so many more houses if we had a federal program that mirrored the state program.
Well, I'd love to learn more. One last thing I want to mention. So the two biggest predictors in a given zip code or census tract of lead poisoning are older houses and low-income families. So we also need to recognize that if you're in a city like mine where something like 80% of our houses were built before that ban on lead paint in 1978, and you think about how hard it is to afford remediating a house, right? I mean, we can get, the city, it could be $20,000 a pop. So we get enough grant funding, we're happy to get $250,000. And that's 10 or 15 houses. It's great if you live in one of those, but we have thousands that are in this situation. So when we have a problem, whether it's with clean water or whether it's with lead, we've got to make sure that there are federal resources to help communities and families cope. And if we get that right, then there will be one more bonus rather than drawback to historic preservation.
Andrea, we have a question online.
Okay, great. The microphone.
Melissa Gessing, who is joining us online, asks, thank you for your service. I'm actually in Iowa and watching online because I came out to Norfolk to see my brother's ship, USS Dennis, arrive home from deployment yesterday. Please talk a little bit about your service and how your experience will shape your foreign policy decisions once in office.
Great. Well, first of all, greetings to Norfolk, and thanks to the family members for serving. My deployment more or less began and ended in Norfolk. It's where they do all the staging for Navy reservists who are headed downrange before you go to South Carolina for combat training, then on off into the desert. And do you need me to move around somewhere? Oh, you want that? Okay. We could auction it off. I'm wondering who's. I got some videographers up here. Maybe it was ours. I guess it'll be one then. Where were we? Norfolk. So here's the thing. One thing you learn when you serve, and I had a great time in the Navy Reserve. It was an opportunity to, as the pitch goes, you see the world, right? Some might ask how a Navy officer winds up serving in a landlocked country like Afghanistan. That's today's force. It's very interdisciplinary, and because I specialize in counterterrorism, unless the terrorists happen to be on a ship, it didn't really make sense, even though I was a Navy guy, for me to be shipboard, and so they sent me to Afghanistan. What I learned over there, more than anything else, is how to trust and get to know people who are completely different than you are. You know, when people are getting in a vehicle, when we're getting ready to go outside the wire somewhere, they don't care whether I'm a Democrat or Republican, I immigrated from, or whether he was documented or not. They care whether I know what I'm doing. They care whether I studied the route. They care if I've looked into where the IEDs might be. They care about whether I know how to respond if we come under attack. That's what they're worried about. And so you learn how many of these other things fall away. Politics, the differences in where we came from, or different ages, different races, none of that. We just had to work together. And I worry that we're losing that as a country. And I also think you shouldn't have to go to war in order to have that experience, which is why I'm a big believer in national service. I think if we expand national service opportunities in this country, not just military service, things like Peace Corps, things like AmeriCorps, things like City Year, so that it basically becomes a norm when you used to be 18 or so, that you're going to go spend a year serving. And whether you're going to college or whether you're going right into the workforce, the first question you get on your college application or your job application was, what did you do during your time in service? I think it would give us all more things in common at a time when our country is hurting because we were being torn apart. And I think it would help us relate to each other across some of these lines. So that's one big thing I learned. The other thing I learned in a very personal way is how much is at stake in the decisions made in that situation. You know, the young women and men have their lives completely changed by the stroke of a pen. And in a week when we're seeing a lot of saber rattling around Iran, by the way, engineered largely by a national security advisor, John Bolton, who was one of the same people who got us into Iraq. That's a source of deep concern. The other day, I had the opportunity in South Bend to visit a high school where we were honoring high school students who had made the decision to serve. And we brought them up on a stage and signed these certificates, and their parents were there, and I came to let them know how proud we were of them. And at the same, even though I was filled up with a lot of positive emotions at seeing these young men and women, feeling a little bit nostalgic about knowing what their experience was going to be like going forward. It was also hard not to feel something within my stomach about the level of trust that they were putting in the United States. The fact that they are ready to have their lives hinging on the wisdom and the judgment of the president and the Congress and those in power. And thinking, this is not a joke. This is not a game. This is not a show. These people that we were patting on the back, that are getting ready to graduate high school, their lives depend on us getting this right. And it's why you don't just go casually threatening to deploy military force to Venezuela or to Iran or anywhere else, unless core fundamental U.S. life and death interests are on the line. And if we lose that, we are going to break the faith that these people put in us, in voters, as well as in the people we elect, when they make that open-ended promise to give, up to and including their lives, in order to keep this country in trust, by carelessly asking them to do something that is right or using them as promises.
Is Mary Van Buren Salazar here?
Yes.
So, Mayor Buttigieg, when I was reading your book, I recognized all these similar experiences you had. So, for example, my first campaign work was Gore. I was in college when Berlin happened, and I was reading more, and I was like, well, I mean, we're the same age. And I had this moment of like consciousness that people that are in our generation are eligible to run to become the president of the United States of America. I mean, and no, honestly, it wasn't. I was calling my friends, and I was like, you guys, like, we could do this. So my question for you is, as we're already beginning to hear a little bit about your youth, how is your age an asset? How is being part of our generation valuable in this campaign and in the future of politics in general?
Yeah, thank you. It can be a little disorienting, right? I mean, I remember as I've grown a little older, first you notice that professional athletes are younger than you. And then you notice that there's somebody flying a plane that's younger than you, and you're on it. And then you have the first time you go into a doctor's office, you notice the doctor is younger than you, right? And sooner or later, that's going to happen with the president too. So it's asking people to reimagine things. Then again, I think there's an opportunity here to, partly our imagination may be locked in by an interesting fact that even though our presidents in my life have all been very different ages from each other, 3 out of our last 4 presidents are the exact same age today. We're all born in the presidents Clinton, Bush, and Trump. We're actually all born in the same summer in 1946. It's really interesting. Even though President Clinton, of course, at his time arrived as a kind of generational figure too. One of the things that surprised me on the road is that the idea of generational change has really animated a lot of people my parents' age, not just people my age and younger. And while I think anybody of any age can serve, I think there are some virtues to having a personal stake in what that future is going to look like. It's one of the reasons I talk a lot about what America will look like in 2054. So that's the year that I'm planning to retire. It's also the year that I would reach the current age of the current president. And I want to be able to say in 2054 that we got to a good place with our economy, with our everyday life, like I was talking about before, but also with the US role in the world, that we're respected and that we didn't do it by trying to make it like 1954, but by really responding to the challenges of the new century. And all these issues that are coming before Washington right now, I feel like they're sometimes being treated like they're somebody else's problem. Like climate, it was being treated like it's somebody else's problem, and it's not. And I don't have to tell Iowa that climate disruption appears to be upon us right now, and it's going to define our opportunities for the rest of my lifetime. Some of the financial decisions that have been made. I know it's not fashionable on the left to talk about deficits, but these things are coming due on our watch and in our lifetime, and we're going to pay the bill for them. Now, I think the deficits are there not so much because of Democrats, but because of unaffordable tax cuts for the rich. But in any case, it means that we have a personal stake in getting that done. And so I'm excited to build, kind of knit together a generational alliance of people my age and younger who are thinking about what's life going to be like for me in the 2050s. And people who are my parents' age, who are concerned about making sure that the world that they are setting up for their kids and their grandkids is going to be a good one. They're going to be proud to have passed on. And I think that's frankly one of the reasons why this project has gone on so well. Thank you.
So these questions that I'm reading were voted on by the book club as the ones they most wanted to hear. The next one is from Tiffany Gale from Union County, Iowa. Tell us more about your time in Iowa for Obama. You wrote about getting stuck in a snowstorm in your book. What type of issues did you see while talking to people in rural Iowa, and how will you address rural issues if you were to be elected president?
All right, thank you. So it was 2008, actually 2007, we were here for New Year's in and around Ringgold, Union, and Decatur counties. I didn't know where those counties were. I was working in Chicago. I got together with a few friends. We had some days off. We believed in Senator Obama and convinced each other to take a road trip and spend a week knocking on doors. And so that's what we did. And we contacted some organizer. I don't even know how we did it. They said, come here, get to work. We came into Omaha and then drove the rest of the way. And it was an experience that really stuck with me. In some ways, it reminded me of home. So I'm from a mid-sized city, but it's in the surroundings around us are rural. So when I see Decatur County or the area around Creston, it's not that different from Marshall County or Fulton County where I live. We even have an Osceola in Indiana close to where I live. So when we spent New Year's Eve in some kind of casino in Osceola, I felt like there was some dotted line connecting me to home. And we met some real interesting characters there. I also felt home because it was unbelievably cold, and that's something that we have in common. But I also felt like I was being brought face to face with a lot of issues that weren't getting a lot of coverage on television. When you knock on doors in Mount Air or Murray, you hear about different things. A lot of it related to the military. In fact, as I described in the book, having always vaguely wanted to serve, it's one of the things that actually motivated me to go ahead and do it, was realizing that I was running out of excuses not to. I met somebody who was a very impressive woman, who was a corpsman in the Navy Reserve, who was irate about that same thing we were talking about earlier, the idea that her government had let her down, both in terms of care for veterans and in terms of what she and her fellow service members were asked to do. I met a lot of young people who were buoyant and bullish about the fact that they were going to serve. But I was struck by the fact that it seemed like almost every younger male that I met was getting ready to serve, which prompted me to do a little soul searching about how few people that I went to college had done that, and wondering why that is, why it's a universal expectation in the area around Creston, but almost exotic in an Ivy League graduating class. And it reminded me what's at stake for rural America and getting these policies right too. Because at one point we were just told to go to a Dairy Queen and get to talking with people, which I guess is more efficient than sometimes the knocking on doors, because that's where everybody can be. And we're talking about some of the things you would talk about today with rural folks. What's going on with the price of corn and beans. That was before we had to deal with this China stuff, tariffs. But similar concerns about whether agriculture, and especially family farming, was going to be sustainable. And made me go back and do some homework about why it's so hard to maintain family farm. Like the concentration in buyers that gives you fewer and fewer places to sell your product when you're a grower in this country, just to name one issue. And I guess the last thing I took away from it was the experience after we got fished out of that ditch by somebody who was very patient and to whom I'm very grateful. I wonder if I'll run into him again. But when we got to caucus night in Murray, we was at a middle school, and there was a basketball game going on. Then the other area, there was the caucus going on, and it just felt like the most democratic thing I could imagine. It was people who shared a community, and they shared an experience, and they were now sharing this political process too. And it really opened my eyes about what a caucus is. I did not envision that 10 or 12 years later I'd be trying to win one. But it certainly got me thinking about the nature of the process and what's so special about the way that candidates who travel coast to coast and go on national television and talk about big ideas and big themes are still expected to have enough humility and touch to come into a small town and talk about why all of these big things we talk about actually matter to the people we're standing in front of.
Alarm that just went off in my pocket says that we have time for one more question, which we'll take from the room, and then because we want to allow plenty of time for pictures and meeting people and things like that. Pam has a question.
Hi, we have the mic. Let's wait for the mic.
My name is Pam, and I'm actually a Hoosier.
All right, where's that?
Indiana University, which is my parents live in Bloomington,
Okay.
rural Monroe County. I
All
actually
right,
voted
well,
for
at least
you.
one other in the room.
I voted for you for treasurer.
Sure.
I voted for you for treasurer.
I'm
I rolled
glad somebody
Richard
noticed that I was
Audible,
voting
I rolled. So, and Indiana was like, so red, they are terrible.
Well, not all of us, right? Okay.
Well, I'm a shameful Democrat and I'm very Republican. They don't know how to count. So my question is, when Andrew talked to me last night, asked me if I wanted to ask her a question, I said, gosh, yes, but I'm not sure. I enjoyed your book. I felt like I was listening to a friend. I remembered a lot of what you talked about with your campaign and everything. And then I went online because I'm connected with women in my sorority all the time. And said, I can ask him a question. What should I ask him? And one of the questions that came up was, you're a mayor of a city that's gone through a renaissance. Maybe you say mid-sized, but a lot of things smallish. Sorry. My family's from the Calumet region.
For what?
The Calumet region.
Oh, okay.
My mother's family is one of the founding families of Munster.
Oh, wow.
I have deep Indiana roots.
That's a great brewery in Munster.
Yes. They wanted to know how your experience as this mayor
Yeah.
translates to being able to govern country.
Right.
Tell me how you can expand on your small microcosm, and it is,
Sure.
to the larger community and all the different facets that aren't necessarily part of the city government
Yeah.
types of.
Yeah, so that's fair game. I should be running if I'm not ready for that question. And yet, in many ways, I think it's my experience that is one of the stronger reasons that I hope people will support me. Look, I get how audacious it is for somebody like me to say that I belong in the office, but it's really a little bit obscene for anybody to look at the Oval Office and think they can just walk in there and do that job, right? When you really think about what's at stake. Yeah. And yet, 45 times, we've sent a person in there who's been immortal with a certain set of experiences and things they're good at and things that they have to learn on the job. And some better than others, but all of them in some way have sought to rise to the task. So why is it relevant what my experience is? Well, first of all, if we're just counting up years, even though I'm the youngest guy in things, I've got not only more years of government experience than the president, which is admittedly a low bar. I got more years of executive experience than the vice president. And I got more military experience than anybody to enter that office since George H.W. Bush. I also think there's a lot to be said for executive experience. So I don't mean to, I have a high regard for all of the different experiences that my competitors are also bringing to this. But you could be in Congress. I don't think I'd be getting that question if I were a member of the House. And yet, you could be a member of Congress or even a very senior member of the Senate and have perhaps never in your life managed more than a few dozen people, depending on what you were doing before you were in the Senate. When you were an executive in government, you learned that there's a lot more to the job than just having opinions on policies. I would say what we learned is there's three parts to the job. One is the policy part. You got to implement and pass good policies. And that's the part that kind of overlaps with being a legislator. The next thing, though, is you got to competently manage an administration. You got to run an organization. And when you're a mayor, especially in a system like ours, a strong mayor system where there's no city manager, for example, then you got to figure out what to do and there's no one else to call. And the third part of the job you learn, and probably the most important job, even though it's the least defined and the hardest to measure, is what I would call the moral dimension. The fact that you're also just responsible for calling people to their highest values, especially when their sense of unity is challenged. It's very hard to measure, but I think we're feeling its absence right now in the presidency, even more than the bad policies or the bad management that's going on. It's that there are moments when we need to be summoned to our highest values. We need a president to do that for us, and it's missing. So when you're a mayor, from hour to hour, your day changes. I mean, you start your day negotiating some kind of economic development deal with a developer. You're trying to figure out whether the numbers add up and whether what they're asking the city to contribute is fair. And then there'll be something that really is out of Parks and Rec. Sometimes literally, like right now, we got a big controversy over a duck pond. We got to figure out who did the duck pond. And just when you're having a good laugh about the duck pond, you get a message letting you know there's been a potentially racially explosive officer-involved shooting. You don't have all the facts. You got a matter of minutes to go on television and figure out what you're going to say when you don't even know everything that happened in order to hold the community together before the incident tears everybody apart. I have literally gotten the 3 a.m. phone call to manage an emergency. And then the next day gotten up and it's the pancake breakfast for Bike to Work week. And the next thing you know, I get a letter from the president or from the Department of Justice saying that we won't get our police funding anymore unless I promise that I'm going to more or less deputize our law enforcement officials to be part of their immigration agenda. And I got to figure out what to tell the president. We told them exactly where they could put their letter, but. What I'm getting at is the range of issues that we talk about nationally, like they're in the abstract. They hit home somewhere in particular. They hit home for us in a diverse and, as you know, economically challenged, but also growing now city. And of all the ways that somebody can be prepared, having the humility to know that nobody walks into that office truly knowing what it's like. But to the extent that you can be prepared at all by a job in government, I'd stack up what I've been through against any of my competitors.
A simple follow-up question. Can I have the contact information for your piano whisperer?
Yes, we'll do. Sure, I'll be brief, so hopefully we can chat. But again, I just want to thank you. My first experience of Iowa democracy really filled my heart with an appreciation for this sense of encounter. I guess it's the other thing to get as mayor too, is knowing that this is all about whether we can persuade individuals and communities that we're on the right path. And in an election that's got this risk of becoming all about him, and we all know what's wrong with him. At least most of us do. We got to make sure it's actually about you. And these conversations and these encounters are how we do it. So if you're drawn to what you heard tonight, if you're attracted to the kind of vision that we're laying out, or the stories that we described in the book, I hope you'll stay involved. You can text, what is it, 25859? You can text Pete to 25859. You can sign up here, get to know some of my colleagues who are here, and we would love to stay engaged with you, stay connected with you as we go all the way to caucus night. But in the meantime, thanks for taking an interest in what I have to say. Thank you for picking up a copy of the book. If you have to do that, that's how we're paying the bills for the wedding we just had. And again, thanks so much for bringing us together and creating this opportunity.